Grace to you and peace from God our Father and from our risen Lord and Savior Jesus, who is the Christ. So before I begin, I just want to bring you thanks and greetings from the more than 30 people who are members of the Churches United for the Homeless team, from the approximately 110 guests who spent the night under the roof of the shelter last night, as well as from the other congregations that are a part of the Churches United for the Homeless family. We are formed and led and guided by more than 60 member congregations, of which Good Shepherd is one. And so we are all engaged in this together, and I wanted to just bring you thanks and greetings from all of those different parts of the life of Churches United for the Homeless. I want to think together with you this morning about three things. One is the figure of Christ. Who is this Jesus that we follow? I want to think together with you too about what does it mean to be a disciple of Christ? What does that look like? How are we called to follow? And then finally, I want to just give you an update about Churches United for the Homeless and some of the things that we are doing now, as well as some of what shaped us over the years. So when I think about the figure of Christ, I think about incarnation. I think about how it is in Jesus Christ we see God choosing to come among us, take on human flesh, enter into what it is to be human. I think about Christ's birth and life and ministry and death and resurrection, and how in coming, Christ comes not among the powerful, doesn't come as a child born into wealth or privilege, but comes as a helpless infant born, as we read in our Gospels, in a stable, to parents who are not in their village home but away from home, wanderers, at least for that period of time. I think about little Jesus, a young child, and that his parents had to flee to Egypt in order to preserve his life. And so that reminds me that this Jesus that we follow had an experience of being a wanderer, someone who was homeless, who was a refugee. And I think, too, about Jesus not choosing to spend his life among the wealthy or the powerful. When you read your Gospels, you will see that Jesus spends the bulk of his time with everyday people and with people who are struggling with poverty and illness and grief, among a people suffering under an oppressive rule. Jesus, in his teachings, has often the hardest words for the wealthy among them, for the leaders among them, for those who fail to show compassion to the everyday people. I think about Jesus as he speaks in this morning's gospel about the shape of a leader is really the shape of a servant. The few verses of Matthew's gospel that I read follow a contentious exchange. Right before this, the mother of two of Jesus' disciples has come to Jesus and she says, I want you to grant that my two sons will sit one at your right hand and one at your left hand in your glory. Right? What she's saying is, I want you to make my sons leaders. And Jesus says, I don't know if you really understand what you're asking. And then the rest of the disciples are upset because there's this ranking thing going on, right? There's this competition. It's so human, right, to be striving against one another. And it's in response to that Jesus says, no, look. That's how the Gentiles do it, right? Among the Gentiles, it's the leaders that they lord it over those. They're a tyrant to those that they rule. But it shall not be so among you. The one who wants to be greatest among you must be a servant, must serve, just as I came, just as the Son of Man came, not to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. The shape of the kingdom is upside down from the ways that we typically think about what constitutes leadership or power. And Jesus demonstrates that true leadership, true power is found in a desire to serve. And isn't that the heart of the gospel, right? That God loved us so much, right? That God came and put on flesh and was human, is human, lived, died, was resurrected, so that the whole world would be reconciled to God, and that death and sin and the devil would no longer have any power forever, right? My first life in the church is as a musician, and I have a lot of favorite hymns. My spouse always laughs when I say, oh, it's one of my favorite hymns, and he says, you have hundreds of favorite hymns. But one of my favorite hymns isn't real familiar to folks. The name of the hymn is Great God, Your Love Has Called Us Here. It's in the red hymnal. And there's a line in the third verse that catches me every time I sing it or read it, and this is the line. We strain to glimpse your mercy seat and find you kneeling at our feet. That we strain to see God someplace high above, right? That's where we expect. But where we really see God is in the figure of Jesus kneeling at the disciples' feet. So if we're to follow this Jesus, what does that look like? I think if we try to be serious about following this Jesus, then there's a call there to serve our neighbors. That if we are followers of this servant, then we are called into lives of service. In our homes, in our families, in our workplaces, in our communities, we are called to be servants and to bring light and hope through that service. These days, I'm privileged to serve as executive director at Churches United for the Homeless in Moorhead. It's considered a call to specialized ministry. I am an ELCA pastor. It's not where I expected to be 10 years ago or even 5, but it is absolutely where God is calling me to be now, and I feel so privileged to be a part of this organization that is founded and completely dedicated to serving our neighbors who are experiencing homelessness. It's the only reason we exist. We don't produce anything that can be sold. We don't make a profit. You can't wear what we do, right? We're always trying to maybe get a little bit of an operating reserve going. That's a struggle because there's always lots of need. But the whole reason Churches United exists is in order to serve. That's why we exist. We were originally formed about 30 years ago by 11 congregations. We observed our 30th anniversary this past fall. And in preparing to observe that anniversary, we did a little research into the history, looked back on old minutes and records, and way back in a file, we found a letter that was part of the original incorporating documents of the organization, to be incorporated as a 501c3. And when I first saw it, I thought maybe I'd stumbled on somebody else's papers that had ended up in one of our files, because the letterhead didn't say Churches United for the Homeless. It said the House of the Suffering Servant. Apparently that was the original name of Churches United for the Homeless as they were getting ready to form it. I think Churches United for the Homeless is probably a better name, but I wish that we could capture that somewhere, because it reminds us that as an organization, this is what we're called to do. We're founded on the idea of serving our neighbor. It was true then, and it's true now. There are lots of things that have changed over the years. When Churches United opened in a church building, the old Bethesda Lutheran Church, evening meal, shelter for the night, that was what we provided. That was the whole thing. Over the years, we've recognized that that's not enough, that we need to do more. And so now we provide shelter, certainly. We have a community center that serves 3 meals a day, Monday through Friday, 2 meals a day on the weekend, open to anybody who's hungry. We served about 80,000 meals last year. On any given night, typically when we're not in winter overflow, about 85 folks shelter under our roof. These days it's a little more with the cold weather. We recognized over the years that it's not enough just to feed someone and give them a bed for the night. You have to help them move on to the next thing. And so we provide case management to help people figure out where to go next, get them hooked in with the resources that they need so that they can move from homelessness into stable housing. And about 5 or so years ago, the board and the executive director at that time and member churches latched onto this idea that if we really want to eliminate homelessness in Fargo-Moorhead, maybe what we need to do is provide homes. And so land was purchased and all the steps begun to construct 43 units of permanent supportive housing, the Bright Sky Apartments. When I came on board, we were working with architects' plans, but there were so many folks who were involved in the dreaming and the planning. And now that's all coming to completion. I'm pleased to be able to tell you this morning that the Bright Sky Apartments are, for all intents and purposes, done. We have been, these last couple weeks, going through punch lists. Those of you who have been involved in construction projects know what's that's like. You look at every little detail and you put painter's tape wherever there needs to be a touch-up. You make sure that everything works. This past week, on Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday, there were semis that arrived at Churches United, or at the Bright Sky Apartments. Even on Monday, in the middle of a snowstorm, the first of them came. And they were delivering the furniture. All of these apartments are fully furnished because the people who move into them will come from homelessness. Almost exclusively, they will come out of homelessness. And so they won't have beds or furniture or towels or sheets or dishes. And so all of those things need to be there if they're going to be successful and stable in housing. And so the furniture came last week. We have boxes and boxes and boxes over there now. I think we're supporting Amazon almost single-handedly because we've been ordering sheets and towels, and all of those have started to arrive. Next week, there'll be groups of volunteers who are coming out, and they're going to be putting those things in the apartments, so that the following week, when the first of the tenants come to move in, they can just walk into their place and be home. We'll have case management on site for these folks to help them be successful. We have agreements with 13 other agencies in the community to provide support. There's a nurse's office. I encourage you later when we have an open house to come and see, walk through. They're beautiful apartments, beautiful building. I think it's helpful, for me anyway, to be able to put a face to something that's abstract, right? Maybe 43 units of permanent supportive housing is a little abstract, so let me put a face or a couple faces on. Churches United for the Homeless is the only shelter in Fargo-Moorhead that can accommodate a family that has an adult male member or a near adult male member. So what that means is sometimes we have families that are headed by single dads. And the very first family that found out for sure that they get to move into one of these apartments is headed by a single dad. He's been at the shelter with his kids for a while. There are 3 kids. They're 11 and about 9 and 6. They haven't had a permanent address in about 2 years. Every day, the school bus comes to Churches United first thing on its route. These kids and the others get on the bus first thing so their peers won't see them getting onto a school bus at Churches United. And at the end of the day, the last stop is Churches United. These kiddos get on and off the bus every day from the shelter. And starting week after next, they're going to get on and off the bus from their home. That's huge. And it's not at all abstract, and it has to do with hope and new starts. And it's only possible because so many people who have, in this community here and other places, have engaged and dreamed and worked. It's easy to get a nice, warm, fuzzy place in your heart for a family and kids. Sometimes I think it's less easy to get a warm spot in your heart for maybe an adult who has experienced homelessness chronically. There's a lot of misconceptions about why people are homeless. I will tell you that every story, every set of experiences is as unique as the individual. There are no 2 stories the same. A lot of the time, the assumption is that it's that individual's bad decisions that have led them there. Sometimes that's true. I don't know about you. I've made some bad decisions in my life, but I have a home, so, right? One of the folks who's moving in, I know that I'm not supposed to have favorites, but you can't help it, right? When you work with people, there are folks who just touch a chord with you. One of the gentlemen who's at our shelter now, he's been homeless on and off for probably about 15 years, more on than off. He's a big, tall guy, real gentle soul. He's got a great sense of humor. He's always the first to want to help with the kitchen or anything else that needs to be done. In his particular case, it was an addiction that led his life to come unraveled and brought him into homelessness. He's been with us a little while now, and he's been clean and sober for about 6 months. He's doing really well. He's in his early to mid-60s, so he's not somebody that's going to go out and get a 40-hour-a-week job and retire in 20 years, right? But that doesn't mean that he doesn't have something to offer, and it doesn't mean that his life isn't valuable. My office at the shelter is right off the med room, and a lot of our folks take medications because they have chronic conditions and illnesses, and this gentleman is in that category. I came in week before last. I knew he was on the waiting list for Bright Sky, but I didn't know if he'd been approved yet. And I came in one morning, and he was in the med room, and he said, "Pastor Sue, I get to go to Bright Sky, and I chose my unit." It's an efficiency. It's just one room and a bathroom, right? It's not big. But he said, it's got 2 windows. That's huge. And he's the kind of person I can see down the road coming back and volunteering at the shelter to help cook meals. I could see him being a part of a tenant council at the new apartments. And I can absolutely see him acting as a mentor and a guide for folks who are experiencing what he has experienced. And that's hope. That's what we're all about. That's the whole reason we exist, to serve. And to see those who are so often unseen and to bring hope and new starts. Thank you for your support of Churches United. Thank you for being dreamers and planners and doers in the community. Thank you for being servants of the servant.